Fantastic. Thank you everyone. So I'll call very quickly my colleagues here on stage with His Excellency Daryll Matthew, Minister of Education of Antiga and Barboda. Welcome. Helen Grant, MP, UK, PM Special Envoy for Girls' Education. Welcome. Safeena Husain, founder and CEO of Educate Girls from the Ether. I hope she's somewhere there with us. Armel Azihar Sly-Vania, which is a GPE youth activist. Welcome. And Lance Spears, last but not least, welcome here to the panel. Please join me. Yeah, after such an inspiring performance, we have to catch up here. So basically, education has been really the neglected child of the climate movement. The sense among the climate community that anything in education takes 10 years or more to achieve results. Actually, and I don't want to make it smaller, I think I call them a solar roof and electric cars. We probably will be able to halve by 2030 if we work really hard. But to halve again emissions by 2040 and achieve net zero by 2050, we will not achieve that without a deep, actually we have to relearn to live on this earth, a deep change in how we act and how we behave and in our mindset. And let's see, we believe that education can play a massive role here and can deliver solution, and that's hopefully what my co-panelist here will offer us. So I'll start with you, Your Excellency Daryll Matthew. Living in an island that actually produces so little of the climate change, but has to pay one of the highest prices there. So can you tell us more about how do you see education being part of the solution?
Well, thank you very much, and let me first of all say good afternoon to Your Excellencies and my distinguished panelists, and good afternoon, everyone. You asked a very good question, and I'll answer by sharing a few examples with you. Within the past 10 years, Antigua and Barboda, where I'm very privileged to be from, an island in the Caribbean Sea, we have had several catastrophic weather events. On the scale for which hurricanes are measured, it goes up to Category 5, which is approximately 250 miles of sustained winds. You are categorized as a Category 5 hurricane. In 2017, we were struck by a hurricane that was categorized as Category 5 plus, simply because there was no additional number on the scale for which that hurricane could have been measured. And that hurricane destroyed 98% of all the buildings on our sister island of Barboda. Within the past 10 years, we have seen a massive growth in what is called sargassum seagrass that manifests itself in tremendous blooms that occupy our beaches, and that is due to the warming of the oceans. Over the past 10 years, we have detected a lot of our groundwater sources to be infested with salt from the ocean. And so when we speak about the effects of climate change, these aren't effects that we expect to happen within the next 30 years by 2050. These are experiences that we are living today. And as you very correctly mentioned, small island states like Antigua and Barbuda and islands in the South Pacific, we suffer disproportionately where climate change is concerned. We are not the major producers of the pollutants that cause climate change, but we are the biggest, we suffer the greatest consequences. And so we are not impressed with the talk shops at COP26. We're not impressed with the promises that never get fulfilled. And you ask about how do we change our education system to address climate change. We must know, in addition to educating our young people about the benefits of living sustainably, we must now change our strategy. Because whereas we used to educate our young people in a particular way to build and to develop our country, we now face the very real prospect of having to educate our people to live in another country as climate refugees. This is one of the realities that we are now facing.
Yeah. Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you really also for grounding this conversation in where it is, because sometimes, especially when you talk about let's reduce consumption, and you have a conversation, how can a child that can't eat reduce consumption? So we have to be really careful in our narrative. Now to you, Helen, as UK Prime Minister Special Envoy for Girls' Education, does actually girls' education has a role in fighting climate change?
Well, for sure, it absolutely does. But thank you, Amel, for this question. It's wonderful to be here today and part of this really special panel. I'm very proud, actually, of the great strides that the UK have taken in relation to climate change, net zero legislation, and as you know, we've just hosted COP26 in Glasgow, which was a great success. And absolutely, girls' education has a key and crucial role to play in tackling climate change. As the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Girls' Education, my role is to globally champion his message that providing every single girl on the planet with 12 years of quality education is one of the best ways of tackling many of the major issues facing the world today, including poverty, inequality, and of course, climate change. And we know that climate change, sadly, is a major disruptor to education. We also know that it disproportionately impacts on girls more than it does on boys. Flooding destroys schools, the degradation of land causes families to flee, and drought means families don't have enough money to send their children to school. And what we also know too, with 200 million women and girls living on the front line of climate change, we are not going to be able to deal with SDG 4 unless we tackle climate change. But what we do know, and this is where my answer comes in, but what we do know, and it's extremely important, that educating our girls can make a huge difference when it comes to dealing with climate change. As the Honourable Minister said so eloquently, it allows girls and women to participate much more in relation to decisions, actions, and leadership on climate resilience, adaptation, and mitigation. And I saw this happening at COP. I had many meetings with groups where the link between girls' education and climate change was illustrated. I spoke to many, many young people who were using their climate education to lobby and advocate and to really make a difference. And the challenges with girls' education are huge. The challenge with climate change is huge. But our ability to make change in the world, if we work together, should never, ever be underestimated.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Helen. And actually would like to move to Safeena. I think she's with us. There you go. I saw a glimpse of you. I'm so sorry you couldn't be here, but you would have had to quarantine for 10 days if you went back, so fully understand that. And Safeena, you work with girls, adults and girls in rural areas and those affected areas day in and day out. I'm a bit insecure how I should look backwards, so I'm going to look at the camera here, so I hope you can see me. So, and I know, Safeena, you've been over the last year very engaged in a brain trust that, kind of bringing climate to education and education to climate. So tell us, what are your drivers to invest, your time and resources in this topic?
Yeah. Thank you, Barboda. I'm really sorry that I was not able to be there in person, and I'm really grateful that this important conversation is being held. I work in these, very rural, remote, and tribal areas in India for girls' education. And we're working with some of the most marginalized girls. And I wanted to bring to the group a little bit of what we're seeing on the ground and what really worries us in terms of the linkage between girls' education and climate, and why we are saying that this is just so critical a conversation to be had. Majority of the girls that we work with are, they spend a large chunk of their time actually fetching water, grazing goats, working on farmland or in coal mines. I mean, and all of this, they're going to be impacted so heavily. With food insecurity, with seasons changing, our girls are going to be at the front line of going hungry, because even in normal times, our women and girls eat last. And so when this comes to it, they will pay a very heavy price. When there's migration due to agriculture, or with coal mines being shut down as we move towards green infrastructure, they will need skilling to really be able to survive this. And so we're just very worried they will be overlooked in this conversation, while they will pay absolutely the highest price.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Safeena. So we've talked, sorry, maybe I will move a bit ahead, and maybe we can create a bit of a curve, because otherwise I can't see you. Thank you very much.
Go forward a bit.
We've talked about girls affected by the climate change, and I'd like to move as girls and young people as activists for climate solution, and we have one of them with us here. We're honored to have you, Armel, here. So maybe my first question to you is kind of what drove you to take part, to become an activist for climate, to take part in this kind of important solution finding for education and its crucial role in combating the climate crisis?
Excellencies, dear panelists and guests, good afternoon. I'm very proud to be here today to discuss about the two important topics, which is climate change and education. And we all know that in order to ensure education and climate change, we really have to focus and recognize on the fundamental basic area for all, because in order to fight climate change, we need to start on the fundamental basic for all. We also need to focus in ensuring and addressing a problem that were forced by climate change. And in order to address that, we have to be equipped with education. And we all know that in our African countries and across the world, there are many obstacles related on equity and equality. But we believe as the young people, we are really inspired. We want to achieve many things. But I believe without education, without skills, without knowledge, we won't have the capacity to resolve all the problems related to climate change. So as the young people, we have to be equipped with the foundational skills like languages, team buildings. We also have to be equipped with digital literacy, because nowadays we are living with the world of technology. So we have to tackle all the challenges we are living within the world we are living. So if young people are built and are equipped with education, they will be able to tackle all the issues. I can take an example of my country. I'm come from in Ireland, which is Comoros Island, where most of the villages are on the coast. So we are really facing the climate change due to the sea levels, and also of the fishing, because most of the population depend on the fishing area, where it's not really took into consideration. We're not really taking out on the fact of the climate change. But I believe if we include that into education, that the fundamental basics and the consequences, if young people are taught from the young age the consequences of overfishing, I think we can build a sustainable and fundamental manner of tackling climate change issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Armel. And then coming to you, Lance, and I know you've been a kind of driving technology skills and collaboration. And the question someone could ask, so like, why are technology skills and collaboration critical actually for addressing the climate crisis by the next generation? And can you share some examples with us, maybe?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. Thank you for inviting me, Excellencies, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm with NetHope. NetHope is a membership organization of some of the world's largest relief development and conservation organizations in partnership with the IT sector in Silicon Valley. So we, in the membership of NetHope, see a lot of these strategies coming together through education and through technology, increasingly to address issues like climate change. And there are at least 3 ways we see these things coming together to form some of the solutions that we're going to need. One of those is in the area of kind of that unique combination of life skills and learning, which the educational sector is really poised to kind of bring together. The scientific perspective on what climate change is doing in our world, and the life skills required to kind of negotiate solutions, navigate complex points of consensus. All of those sorts of things are coming together, and they're increasingly technology enabled. And so we're beginning to see more and more of that kind of cross-section happening around climate solutions in our network. The second place we see that is around job skills. So there is a whole new economy being birthed right now. There's a whole new low to no carbon economy that's coming into being right now. You're seeing more and more news of it, more and more evidence of it, and people are going to need skills in order to thrive and succeed in that economy. Some of those are technological, and some of those are the traditional sorts of things that the educational system has been doing all along, just wrapped into more of a digital envelope, if you will, or a data-based envelope. And so those skills are going to be essential to providing the ability for people to find their place in that economy and to thrive and to use and work through that economy in order to tackle climate change. So that's the second area that we see coming together. And the third really is around policy. Climate change is not a phenomenon that's going to be tackled solely by individual actions alone. It's going to require policy to help level the playing field, to help incentivize appropriate actions. And one of the big roles of the education system is to train and bring up an educated and engaged citizenry. And it's that educated and engaged citizenry that's going to need to vote for those policies. Unlike some of the stereotypes around things like the Paris Agreement or even the COP process, it's not going to be a one and done sort of policy framework. It's going to be something that we will need to continue refining throughout our lifetimes and throughout those of our children. And that educated, engaged citizenry, digitally literate, data literate, able to help vote for those policies is going to be critical. And we're seeing more and more of the member organizations in NetHope really starting to look at those intersections.
Thank you very much, Lance. So I'll move to the second part of the panel where we're going to talk about how we can drive this agenda further. And so just a question here into the room. How, we just had the COP26 in Glasgow in the UK, and I know the UK government with UNESCO and others have brought actually the first meeting between the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Education and drove a declaration. However, let's see how much that's been translated in the NDC. So who of you had the chance to go through the NDC, read through the NDCs of all the country at COP26? Can you raise your hand? Okay, no one, but someone did. Education International did. And out of all NDCs, they actually found only 20 who talk about education as a potential strategy to combat climate change, and none of them, 0, who see it as a mandatory strategy. So there is really a still big gap to bring kind of education as a weapon to fight, if I want to say climate change, into the climate and environment arena. So, Your Excellency, Matthew, you are a Minister of Education. So why are we absent in this climate dialogue, and what would it take that a global movement happens that creates sustainable solution and impact on terms of climate education?
You see, again, I can speak from the perspective of a small island developing state. Education is indeed a very useful tool and strategy that must be employed to combat climate change, but education is a long-term strategy. In our country, we do not have time. There's an urgency of no. So when we take 10, 15, 20 years to educate a child or to educate children about how we can live sustainably, how we can put proper mechanisms in place to combat climate change, we would have been suffering for 20 years the effects of the very climate change that we need to combat. As I mentioned earlier, there is no salt water in our wells, so that water can no longer be used. So we must go through a very expensive desalination process to get potable water. We are facing more devastating storms more frequently today. And so as we speak about education, yes, we understand and we appreciate and we accept very much that education must be a key part of the strategy. But for us, there's an urgency of no. We need action now, because there will be a point in time where we'll reach that point of no return. Once we cross that line, that's it for us. And so we do not have the luxury of large land masses that we can retreat from the coastline as sea level rises. My colleague here, you also live on an island, and so you understand what it's like to see the continued incursion of the ocean.
Yeah.
We have an urgency of no.
But you talk also about education being kind of an adaptation strategy as
No,
well.
absolutely, absolutely. So I would never disagree with that notion, because we are optimistic that solutions will be found.
Yeah.
So I hope it's not coming across as we believe that all is lost. We do not believe all is lost. And one of the things that I'm optimistic about is that as a species, as a human race, we have always been very resilient and we've always found solutions. And so I believe that we will find a solution. However, I do not want it to be lost upon us. We in the small islands have an urgency of no.
No, I understand that fully. So Helen, you know, this argument we hear again and again about, you know, like it's a long-term solution. So why do you think, like, what benefits do we get if we invest today in climate education?
Well, do you know, the simple answer is, I think, that climate education actually equals climate action. It's happening, and almost the living proof of it is sitting on the stage with us today with this young woman, Amel, speaking so eloquently, not apologetically, but saying what the situation is, saying what you want and what you need. And, you know, I saw this happening as well at the COP. I had many meetings with young people. And it was amazing seeing their activities, seeing them advocating, seeing them lobbying, seeing them holding leaders to account, shining spotlights on embarrassing points, little gaps, issues. And it's working. It really is working. They are making a difference. And I also think they're managing to find a space for their voices to be truly heard, whether it's at this summit or it's at the COP or it's at other summits. It is actually happening. And in Glasgow, I really saw leaders listening. They're having to listen, and they're realizing that there's no way out. They are going to have to act and listen and do something, because these young people are there and they're not going to let them off the hook. I think the plus too, as well, speaking not as a girl, sadly, anymore, or even a young woman, maybe a bit more middle and older. But what I can tell you, that even us older people, you know, we are parents, we're grandparents, and we also genuinely, truly care that we leave the planet in a better state for our children and our grandchildren and those that follow. And I think that is the hope. But it's getting there. You're doing it. And we need you to do it.
Thank you, thank you. I'll go back to Safeena quickly, because we talk about, you know, climate education. There are this brain trust work, you know, showed that if you invest, you know, in climate education, basically climate literacy, can reduce between 20 and up to 37%, you know, in the mitigation side, not talking about the whole adaptation side of it. So, Safeena, yeah, there you go. So where do you see, how can we drive this agenda further, you know, to kind of put education at the center of climate solutions?
I think education really, and especially girls' education, has to be at the center of this entire conversation. I wanted to leave people with one statistic that, you know, just absolutely blew me away. Care International says that women and girls who are living below the poverty lines are 14 times more likely to die in a climate disaster. I mean, that's what our women and girls will be facing, especially in kind of areas where we work, which are poor, which are marginalized, they're rural, remote, they're tribal. And that's a disaster that's really kind of coming their way. And so this has to be driven, and it has to be driven through access to education and access to quality education at speed. And I love what Helen said, and I think this can just be the rallying cry for all of us, saying, you know, climate education is what leads to climate action. So it is absolutely the foundation. So if you want to change things, that's where the investment really needs to be made. And really, I think keeping the most vulnerable girls at the heart of it is going to be absolutely key, because they really can't advocate for themselves. And so we will have to raise that voice. People like Helen and the climate activists and the young people will have to raise the voice for the rural girls and for the marginalized girls.
Thank you very much. And raising voices is a good link to you, Armel. So tell us, you know, how can you help bring this agenda more onto the global stage of education and its role into climate?
Thank you very much. I do believe for a real solution and for a lasting impact, we have to invest in girls' education and also in education in general. Not only education, but inclusive and quality education. That will also reflect on our global realities. We have to invest in education that will reflect on what is happening within our communities, countries, and the whole world in general, and also in the global challenges, that's what is happening in the world. I do also believe that the other way is to encourage young people on building a sustainable solution, and also to push them while they are building resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll come to you, Lance, before we close. And you know, this is maybe a detail we haven't discussed before, but lastly, I saw a statistic, because I live now in the UK, which I found quite powerful. They said if you need a gas boiler, for example, in your home, you have like around 98,000 engineer and technician you can ask to do that. If you wanted a heat pump, which is a more sustainable and kind of climate-friendly alternative, there are like 750. So it shows kind of that massive skill gap. So in terms of, if we want to achieve actually our climate goals, we have to invest also a lot in skilling and upskilling, and we don't have that right now. And you talked a little bit about skill. So what do you think needs to happen for us to kind of be able to drive the full agenda of education to fight climate change?
I think the education sector is going to need to be of two minds about this. The urgency is real and it's right, and we should all be doing as much as we can, as fast as we can, to bring people up to speed and make them informed decision makers. But the other reality is that unless we find a way in the next decade to pull the last 200 years of industrial emissions out of the atmosphere, the climate is going to continue to change for decades into the future, right? So that's the inertia that's built into the physics of the Earth system. And so we are, in fact, in education playing a long game. We are helping people be resilient and creative problem solvers, be good community builders, be active learners. One of the things that's really striking about this summit for me is that, you know, if we had it 30 years ago, it might have been very curriculum focused. And there's so much content here about leadership, about creativity, about active learning, and all of those things. And those are all critical, vital skills that are going to be necessary for when the young people today are adults and they are still dealing with a changing climate, because that will be true. Those skills are going to be vital for them to have creative, engaged lives and pass on what they know to the next generation. So I think if we can keep both of those things in mind, then the education system will be positioned uniquely to do things for humanity that many other sectors are not able to do.
Thank you very much. And I mean, the conversation has to be also about this just transition, because, you know, I think talking with Andreas Schleicher, who also spoke here about the recent OECD study, who shows that young people actually in many countries do understand the challenges around, the climate challenges, but they feel kind of disempowered, almost hopeless. They don't feel empowered to act. And so part of our role is to empower them to act, but also to change the narrative, one towards the solution, but the other narrative is also, how can, at the end, to have a climate justice and to have everyone behind this agenda, at some point the rich will have to pay for it, and the rich means the rich country versus poor country, but also within countries, you won't be able to achieve this agenda in a climate justice way without having that equity conversation, I think, happening. So thank you very much. We are actually at the start, so I know the UK government has been really pushing for this. We have GP and activism, and as you said, Matthew, if I may, it's not 2050, it's yesterday, basically, and we are in the middle of those challenges. We have to find solutions now. And we have a brain trust, and I want just to call on Max McCabe here. Maybe you can stand and wave, who's been leading a brain trust over the last 12 months on bringing, education to climate. So if you want to kind of get involved and invest your time and resources and your network, reach out to him or to anyone here in the panel. Thank you very much. We're at the start of this journey, but I hope we will find soon the solutions, and I will share your optimism that we are a very resilient species. And with that word, I'll thank everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.